So I recently re-enabled comments on my YouTube videos, which I wanted to do because I'm interested in creating some viewer-inspired content on the channel, specifically that related to naval history, naval architecture, things like that, because I've always been interested in that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is this video, I'm going to talk about some history, and then if any of you guys are interested, I want you to comment on how you would design a ship. Doesn't have to be modern, doesn't necessarily have to be World War era, just how you would design a ship in general. And if I like your comment, I'll feature it in the next video. So how does that sound? I do not expect to get many comments, but I am going to make a video on whatever comments I get. So I kind of wanted to talk about like which battleship of World War II I think is the best, because like that's like an area where there's like a lot of debate among some historians. So I want to like kind of go over like which country had the best naval tactics during World War II and some of the other stuff. So first off, let's start with Italy. Italy is kind of a country that I think goes underappreciated in a lot of World War II history, because what the Italian Navy's problem was not that it had a bad navy. What their problem was that they didn't have good leadership in their navy. So the thing about the Italian Navy was the Italian naval commanders would just run away when anything happened. That was just their strategy. It was like the run away from the British. I don't care that we outnumber them, run away from the British. They also didn't have a very good reconnaissance or air support. When human torpedoes disabled HMS Queen Elizabeth, they did not have proper reconnaissance equipment to survey the wreck and mistakenly believed that the ship was still operational, which caused them to not attack the port at Alexandria, which is quite an L moment for the Italians, and not something that affected them well during the war. So with the Italians, they had the Vittorio Veneto class battleship, which was, to be honest, a very good battleship. It was essentially just an Iowa, but with kind of different gun structure. And what the Italians had was they also had this unique gun design, where basically, because of the way that they engineered their charges in the barrels of their guns, they could get like a 15% range boost for the same caliber guns. The only trade-off was you had to replace the barrel twice as often. The barrel on Italian ships had to be replaced every 140 shots, whereas the average barrel on an average battleship with that caliber of guns only had to be replaced every 250 shots. Although since they were mostly operating in the Mediterranean, it didn't actually see much combat, they saw that as a worthy trade-off. Now, I actually did a video on the Vittorio Veneto in WoWs, and playing it in WoWs, I think it was a good ship, but if you also review the stats, it's pretty okay as well. It's got 15-inch guns, 9 of them. It was technically not subject to the Washington Naval Treaty because it was completed in 1940. However, it did go way outside the limitations that the Washington Naval Treaty set. It was 41,000 tons. So, there's that. No, it totally was not a legal ship for that time, but it was a very good one. And a lot of other Italian ships tend to follow the same trend, where they would have really good guns. Where the Italians lacked, though, was mostly AA defenses. The ships did not have very good AA. In fact, I think when Vittorio Veneto was attempting to escape the British aircraft carrier Illustrious, the Italians shot down one plane. Illustrious's squadron was comprised of like over 24 planes, and they shot down one. And Vittorio Veneto was attacked by torpedo bombers, I think like 4 separate times. So for them to only shoot down one torpedo bomber while getting attacked 4 times definitely shows you their lack of AA defenses. Alright, Next up is the British, and the British, to be honest, didn't have as good of a navy as a lot of people think. Like, they won the war, so they must have a good navy, right? Actually, like, in a lot of ways, their navy was lacking, to be honest. And I know everyone's going to hate me for saying that, but if you just review a lot of the history, it's true. You can just look at it. For one, the idea of speed as armor was pioneered by Admiral Fisher with the original Dreadnought class battleships, and that was definitely a concept that was prevalent in a lot of British shipbuilding for the rest of World War One and World War Two. Now, as you can see with HMS Hood and the disaster of HMS Hood, that was not a very good doctrine in terms of shipbuilding, because what you would have is you would have an extremely fast ship with good firepower, but it would not actually be able to take on ships of its type because the armor was just so terrible. Hood took 3 15-inch shells from Bismarck in the famous battle with the Bismarck, and immediately blew up after the 5th salvo. The Hood sank in less than a minute. With the other drawback of British ships was the AA defenses. This was especially prevalent in the Pacific with Prince of Wales and Repulse getting attacked by Japanese torpedo bombers and just getting absolutely smoked. I don't think the Japanese lost any torpedo bombers for the cost of... They destroyed 2 battleships, and they didn't lose any torpedo bombers. And although a lot of that is due to the captain actually left port without waiting for air support first, which is not a good idea. But in his defense, at the time, there had never been an instance where a fully alerted battleship that was at sea had been sunk by aircraft. So he felt that he was justified in sailing from Singapore without air support. Alright, next up is Japan. Now, everyone's heard of the Yamato-class battleships with the massive super battleships, 18-inch guns, insane armor, but the thing is, those battleships suffered from the same lack of anti-aircraft defenses that so many other battleships suffered from, and that was just a major drawback, because both Musashi and Yamato were destroyed by American air attacks. Musashi was destroyed at Leyte Gulf after taking 19 torpedoes and 12 bombs, which I believe is the single most amount of munitions that a battleship has withstood before sinking. And even then, Musashi didn't sink until the following morning after 10 hours of damage control by her crew. So that just goes to show you how durable some battleships can be. Now, those battleships were specifically designed to be able to take on American super dreadnoughts. They were specifically designed to be able to take on American super dreadnoughts, many of them at once. And they probably would have succeeded in that role if they actually got the chance to take on any American super dreadnoughts. Because Japanese destroyed all of them at Pearl Harbor and then didn't actually get a chance to destroy them for good once the Americans repaired them. And the Americans did that. Moving on to the United States now. Well, lastly, Japanese dreadnoughts, because that's always a noteworthy event. There were some pretty good Japanese dreadnoughts, to be honest. Like, the Japanese had some of the best dreadnoughts during the interwar period, but they just didn't really hit the mark while modernizing them. Alright, moving on to the Americans. The Americans definitely were lacking at the start of the war, but because the United States at the time just had such massive industrial capabilities, they were able to build a massive navy. They had 345 ships at the beginning of the war, including 3 aircraft carriers and 8 battleships. At the end of the war, they had, I believe, 19 battleships and almost 80 carriers. Which just goes to show you how massive the industrial capabilities of the United States are. And the industrial capabilities of the United States are still insanely massive. massive industrial capabilities. And the United States also perfected the AA stats on their battleships. They just maxed out the AA so hard. There were multiple instances of kamikaze pilots just getting absolutely smoked when they tried to attack the Iowa class or any of the other classes. There was also the Alaska class battle cruisers, which were extremely well equipped as escort ships, which was what they were designed for, and they were also extremely well equipped as battle line ships because of the extremely high caliber guns that they had even for their type. Another thing is the American aircraft carriers were some of the most durable carriers ever built. There was USS Franklin, which took a massive Japanese airstrike and still managed to survive. The entire flight deck got blown off and the bombs exploded in the hangars, but it still managed to make it back to Pearl Harbor under its own power. There was also USS Bunker Hill, which was hit by 2 kamikazes within 15 minutes, but still, once again, made it back to Pearl Harbor on our own power, which is genuinely impressive because carriers aren't really supposed to be that durable. And, okay, next up, we have to talk about the Germans. Of course we have to talk about the Germans because they were part of some of the most famous naval action during the war. They had some of what is considered to be some of the best ships during the war. Now, the Germans also had very good industrial capabilities, but they often didn't utilize them in the way that was best. By the way, I'm not a German supporter when I say this. I hate Nazis. Like, genuinely. Nazis are friggin' stupid. But, they just didn't really utilize their industrial capabilities to their maximum potential, especially since they were getting so much iron and oil from Sweden. But they were just, at the end of the war, they just got completely smoked. They were out of fuel, they were out of iron, they just didn't have anything left in them. And the thing is, after there was a incident where Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and Tirpitz were part of the main battle squadron, and they were tasked with destroying some British convoys, and they got absolutely wrecked by some British cruisers, British battleships, British light cruisers, and Hitler, being the temperamental guy that he was so angry that he ordered the German admiral at the time, I can't remember his name for the life of me, but he ordered the German admiral at the time to scrap the entire German battle fleet. Which just, like, if a naval operation fails, don't scrap the squadron that carried it out. And of course there was Tirpitz, the so-called Lone Queen of the North, who single-handedly prevented the British from gaining naval superiority in the Baltic Sea for the entire duration of 1944 up until 1945. And they dropped 6 12,000-pound bombs on KMS Tirpitz before it sank. That's basically the maximum amount of punishment you can give a ship before nuking it. So, like, this ship was essentially got the amount of munitions equivalent to a small tactical nuke dropped on it, and it took that much to sink the ship. And then, of course, we have to talk about France. Nobody really talks about France in World War II discussions, but I'm going to talk about France anyway. Now, France didn't really get a chance to use their navy during the war, but they did have some good ships like Richelieu, Jean Bart. The thing is, the Free French forces led by Charles de Gaulle were extremely stubborn in terms of surrendering to the Germans. They were so stubborn, in fact, that when the British ordered them to surrender to the Germans, the British actually had to attack the Free French fleet to make sure that the Free French battleships did not fall into the hands of the Germans. Because if they did, that would have just given the Germans so much leverage. So they actually bombed the Free French fort at Casablanca, the Free French fleet at Casablanca, multiple times, and neither of the Richelieu-class battleships were finished by the end of the war. But that's just France, I guess. Anyway, bye guys. Make sure to comment how you would design a ship, and I'll make a video on those later. Bye.